Welcome to Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music. Season 1, The Beatles. This project started off as a live show created in partnership with the Berman Theater at the J Detroit, and has grown exponentially since then, including shows about other bands and other genres. Now we're doing this podcast where in each episode we're going to dive deep into the history and the legacy of most of our favorite band, and that is the Beatles, focusing on where Jews and the Jewish community contributed and collaborated to their stardom. Each episode begins with a recording from our live show telling a quick and high-level version of the story, followed by this episode, this deep dive really getting into it, as I interview some really special guests. It's no secret Jewish events today can be appropriately hard. We have some serious issues that we're grappling with as a community, and they often require a box of tissues and a therapy appointment afterwards. The Storied live show was conceived and developed at the J in Detroit in partnership with the Berman Theater, not as the answer to this problem, but as an answer to this problem. We are focused on a positive narrative, Jewish joy, and reminding people about the great contributions made by the Jewish community. We're excited to see Storied grow with this podcast and many more live shows. Now, you may be here because you're a Beatles fan, or you may be here because you're looking for positive Jewish content. In either case, our intent is for all of your delight, and I think you're going to get there. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see this awesome Storied shirt that I'm wearing, and it was designed and made by a sponsor of the show, Yonatees. Now, Yonatees makes awesome custom merch and some really great Jewish-themed merch, like the ones you're seeing popping up on the screen here. If you're listening on an audio feed, pop over to YouTube just to see what I'm showing you, because it's worth it, and I think you're going to like it. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, we would love to talk to you. Check out the links in the story notes, including our website, www.story.show, for more information about who we are, what we do, the other bands and genres we've covered, or how we can bring this live show to your city. If you like what we've done here, please leave us a review and maybe some stars. If you have any questions, hit us up on our socials. We'd love to hear from you. All the links, again, are in the show notes. And with that, let's get this show on the long and winding road. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of Storied, and I'm really excited for this episode. We're now a third of the way through season 1. Today's conversation is an interesting one because we're going to be talking to Yuval David, and Yuval David is an actor. He's an activist. He's somebody who you may recognize from television. He's somebody that you may recognize from Jewish community advocacy. He's somebody who has spent his professional career in the spotlight, and you may recognize him from shows like Madam Secretary or What Would You Do? You also may recognize him as an LGBT activist, somebody who's fiercely been there for the community. And in the last 2 years, he's been doing the same thing for the Jewish community. Again, because I'm a statistics junkie, I was looking at the statistics for Storied for the first 4 episodes, and surprisingly, Japan is the number 2 most listened to country for Storied. Obviously, the United States is number 1. And I was reflecting on why Japan. I don't know the answer. And if you have thoughts, I'd like to hear them. But I find it interesting that Asian countries tend to not have anti-Semitism. So today's conversation is about the Beatles, about John and Paul, and some of the things that they said that made Brian Epstein and even George Martin, who wasn't Jewish but was an ally, made them uncomfortable. And we're going to talk about the place for humor and jokes in the community, as well as understanding that not everything is anti-Semitism. I'm really grateful that in episode 2, we got to talk to Leslie Cavendish, who confirmed the conclusion that we came to. But I'm also glad that you guys get to hear how we got to it. You're going to hear some really great references of comedy. You're going to hear some really great references of personalities who said things that made other people uncomfortable. And that's okay, because that's their job, and how to differentiate between that and hate speech. You know, as I'm recording this, I'm remembering that I've seen that Japan has a very large underground Beatles fan base, and that's why there's a lot of bootlegs from Japan. And so I don't know how to say it other than, hey there, nice to meet you, Japanese listeners. So like the listeners in Japan who found this podcast, love will find a way. So gather round, all you clowns, and let me hear you say that you love the Storied podcast. Let's get on with this. As we dive into the heart of the band's life, we can't ignore some of the casual anti-Semitic and homophobic remarks that occasionally reared its ugly head in the community, and maybe even by them. In 1964 in Montreal, where the Beatles were staying, they received a chilling phone call threatening to kill the Jew Ringo. And the threat maker's reasoning was Ringo had a big nose.
And of course, Ringo wasn't Jewish, but that didn't stop the hatred. Interestingly, Ringo had a Jewish stepfather named Harry Graves, and his mother, Elise Starkey, was once rumored to be of Jewish ancestry, but no definitive proof has ever surfaced, so I'm not going to say that. He also married the Bond girl and Jewish Playboy model, Barbara Bach. Her name was originally Barbara Goldbach, and they got married in 1981 and have had a fairy tale, long-lasting marriage, and the two are still married today. Now, that's 44 in human years, but in celebrity years, that's like hundreds of years of marriage. And again, this is the closest thing that we would have to an actual Jewish Beatle. But let's talk about John and Paul's words. When discussing whether to hire Brian Epstein as their manager, Paul allegedly stated, well, Jews are good with money. And John declared, show business is an extension of the Jewish religion. While they had a wonderful relationship, John Lennon would often address Brian to his face as that rich fag Jew, a double whammy of homophobia and anti-Semitism. Early in their career, John and Paul were stressing about money and the way things were working out, and Brian explained to him, baby, you're a rich man, stop worrying. And that was actually the inspiration for the song, Baby, You're a Rich Man. But when they were laying down the tracks, John would often sing, Baby, You're a Rich Jew, and that was much to the discomfort of George Martin. There was one particular evening when Lennon and the other Beatles were drinking, and Epstein revealed that he had just finished writing his autobiography called A Cellar Full of Noise. John Lennon replied, why don't you call it A Cellar Full of Boys? And Epstein replied, well, why don't I call it A Cellar Full of Goys? Thinking that they would get the reference, but they all got the reference. No, 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 said John. I've got the perfect title. What about Queer Jew? Now, those are uncomfortable statements, but I think the most telling story about this topic is the actual relationship between John Lennon and Brian Epstein. In April of 1963, the two went on a holiday to Barcelona, where Epstein opened up to Lennon about his homosexuality and the challenges that he faced in a society that criminalized same-sex relationships. Lennon later said, it was my first experience with a homosexual that I was conscious was a homosexual. Lennon recounted that they would sit in cafes and he would ask Brian what he thought of men as men walked in the door. And through this voyeuristic and vicarious objectification that John was used to, he was used to doing it to women. He was seeing it done through men. And in that moment, John learned that gay men and straight men are the same. They just love different people. And that was an eye-opening moment for John. Lennon was deeply affected by Epstein's struggles, and he wrote the song You've Got to Hide Your Love Away as a tribute to his friend. And it's a bittersweet reminder of the pain and secrecy that so many in the LGBTQ community have endured throughout history. Now, from the research I've done on the topic, and actually from the podcast episode I did with Leslie Cavendish, who was in the room when some of these statements were made, I don't for a moment believe that John or Paul were anti-Semites. I think they grew up at a time when comments like that were accepted, and that doesn't excuse them because they hurt George Martin's feelings. They hurt Brian's feelings. They hurt other Jews in the circle's feelings. And I believe that if those conversations were happening today, they would be happening and be looking very different. It's a reminder that our heroes are human and that the fight against prejudice and injustice and discrimination is an ongoing one, both in the music industry and the entertainment industry and beyond. After Brian died in 1967, somebody asked John about that Spain trip and the rumors of the two of them having an affair. And John said very openly, we were lovers in the sense that we loved each other very deeply. There was just no physical aspect to our love. So let's appreciate John and Brian and their relationship with the song, Hey, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away.
Hey, before we get to this interview, I want to take a moment and thank our new sponsor, Tequila Kosher Spirits. And they make the kosher tequila that I am seeing popping up around Detroit. And if you know me personally, or if you follow my social media, you'll know that I'm sober and I don't drink. But when I go to different Jewish events and I hear this topic come up, everybody has really great things to say about it. So I'm excited that Tequila reached out and said that they wanted to sponsor the podcast. Every special Chaim deserves a special spirit, but finding high-quality kosher spirits is near impossible until now. So we're introducing Tequila Kosher Tequila, the world's first Jewish-inspired tequila, celebrating culture, community, and tradition. Tequila is 100% kosher and 100% additive-free. Check it out at buy.tequilaspirits.com for a smooth tequila blanco and bold tequila reposado. Tequila, l'chaim like you mean it. The link is in the show notes. Now let's hear this interview. Yuval, it is wonderful to have you here. I appreciate that you're here.
It's good to be here.
This is going to be the strangest episode of this podcast. And I believe that the reason why it's going to be the strangest episode of this podcast is because we're not really going to talk about the Beatles much. And the reason is this story is about these semi-anti-Semitic or possibly anti-Semitic and homophobic comments that were made by the Beatles and in their circle. And in the live show, I come to the conclusion that it wasn't anti-Semitism. It was guys who were friends giving each other a hard time in a language that they spoke 60 years ago. And today, we probably wouldn't say that to our friends or in public. And maybe we would, but in episode 2 of this season, I interviewed Leslie Cavendish, who was there. He was in the room when some of these statements were made, and he came to the same conclusion. He's a Jewish man who said this wasn't hateful anti-Semitism. This was, for lack of a better term, locker room talk. And that's sort of the end of the conversation, right? We can dissect their conversation, but the people who were there are coming to the same conclusion. So then the question is, what are we talking about? And I think that is a much more important thing. And that is, what is anti-Semitism? What are jokes versus not jokes? What is homophobia? And I think that you are the perfect person to be having this conversation with me today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you for having me join you and all the great work that you do. It's just a treat to be on your podcast. Look, language is something that we deal with. Gosh, language is something I deal with on a daily basis, whether I'm on air on the news advocating for America, for Israel, for the Jewish people, for battles against anti-Semitism, for LGBTQ causes, all of these things. Oh, and I'm going to silence my phone as it dings in the background.
Yes.
I use language understanding when I have a short amount of time for a soundbite when I'm on live news or when I'm writing articles and having them published in international publications. But the thing is, I come from the world of entertainment, media, and advocacy. Those are the 3 pillars of my career. So language matters. Now, I've also been battling hate speech for 2 decades as part of my advocacy, talking about the risks and the dangers of hate speech when it ultimately leads to inciting violence. But there's a big difference between hate speech and humor, a huge difference. Hate speech is meant to demean, to incite, to strip away dignity. Humor, especially between friends, people who are collaborating and working together and want to be friends and want to work together, in those situations, it is a space of love or a space of like or a space of at least appreciation. And It's used as a way that's meant to connect, to lighten, to remind us that we don't have to take ourselves too seriously all the time. I oftentimes say that the people who take life the most seriously don't take life very seriously. And the people who don't take life seriously enough take life way too seriously. So The problem today is that some people conflate the two. A friend teasing you with love is not hate. A comedian poking fun at the absurdities of love is not hate. True hate speech doesn't make you laugh. it makes you feel small, it makes you feel unsafe and erased. So
Right.
what you're speaking about here is we need to be able to, or my hope is that we can reclaim the ability to tell the difference. Otherwise, society just dulls itself into silence. We'll be afraid to laugh with each other, afraid to joke, afraid to be real. And when that happens, the actual hate speech, the dangerous kind, slips through the cracks because everyone is too busy policing harmless humor.
Right. I love that just in your answer, there's multiple layers. And I think that one of the ways that we differentiate is, am I in on the joke or am I the butt of the joke? Right. So when friends are giving each other a hard time or ribbing each other and they're in on the joke and that's part of the humor,
Right.
that's friends making jokes, right? It's when I don't have the agency to walk away or stop or get you to stop, where it moves from jokes to abuse. And probably one of the best examples of that today, I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast or the YouTube show or the Netflix show, Kill Tony. Are you familiar with that group?
Not well enough to comment about it.
So Tony Hinchcliffe is a comedian. He's been doing this for 15 years or so. I think 12 years is how long his podcast has been on. He's part of the Joe Rogan universe of comedians. But basically, he's got the show where he has comedians come on for 60 seconds. They do their set, and then they interview this person. And a lot of people really hate Tony Hinchcliffe because he makes a lot of what could be considered inappropriate jokes. They make fun of people with disabilities. They make fun of gay people. They make fun of black people. They make fun of trans people. They make fun of everybody. But it's like this this trend of the roast battles, right? Where I'm coming so that we can make fun of each other. And I think more important than the idea that they're making fun of people with disabilities, if you're funny and you keep up with it, you get a job, right? And so you have guys like Aaron Belial and Martin Phillips and Fiona Cawley, who I've heard, hours of their material as comedians with special needs. I'm a special needs advocate. I've got a daughter with special needs, right? Like, so seeing an adult with special needs being made fun of in front of millions of people could be considered bad, except they're there for the joke. They're there to keep up with it. They're there. And then because they're good at that, they now have a job. They now have a career. And it's amazing. And I think that sort of agency of I'm here for it, as opposed to this is happening against my will, is a big differentiator in the question of, is this a joke or is this, abuse? Is this hate speech? Is this, anything more than that? And I think that, again, in these multiple layers, that's where we have to look at, right? Do you have agency in this two-way street, or is this a barrage? Is this an abuse? And I think that's the first layer.
I think like I mentioned before, comedy, when things are meant to be comedic, it comes with appreciation, love, or appreciating someone's existence and finding a comedic way to deal with it, whether laughing about it, laughing with it, whatever it is, it comes from a place of appreciation. Hate is the exact opposite.
Right.
Hate is wanting to diminish, to erase, to cancel, to stop, to exclude. The line is not blurry. We just need to have the courage to be able to see that line and understand it. Our society over the last 10 to 15 years has become far too oversensitive about these topics, policing speech and policing the way people are able to speak with each other and about each other. You know what? Ultimately, life is tough. So many things about life really suck. They're really hard. There are so many challenges and horrendous things that happen. If we're not able to laugh about it, all we're going to do is cry about it and be angry about it, and that sucks even more.
Right. I think one of the best examples that is probably bigger than Kill Tony in the last couple of years is Dave Chappelle, and how people tried to cancel him for supposed transphobic jokes. And And every time that,
And I spoke out about that quite
yeah,
a
yeah,
bit.
yeah, I think the if you listen to the jokes that he made, he was talking about how he loved and appreciated this person and was making jokes around that. He wasn't saying these people are bad. And I'm glad that you spoke out about that, because most of the people who complained just heard Dave Chappelle's making jokes about trans people and said, cancel him. That's not what was happening. He was talking about his friend who's trans and making jokes,
Yeah, I
as he's
mean,
supposed to be doing.
I didn't say cancel him. I actually said, Dave, be funnier. There were some of his jokes that I just didn't think were funny, and I was like,
Right.
wow, that didn't land. And I think Dave Chappelle is very funny and has a brilliant and shrewd mind. And there were times that it just came off as a rant and less as a funny monologue, or he missed the ball on some of those jokes. But that also happens. No comedian is going to be funny
Yeah.
all the time. So
Right.
I didn't find myself insulted by what he was saying. My perspective as a performer, as a comedic actor, when I would focus on that part of my career, my producer hat, my director hat, all of those things, those are the parts that were insulted, because I was like, oh, he could have done that better. Like, he could
Right.
have done a better job there. So that's the only part that I saw with Dave Chappelle. But you know what? He also set the bar so high for himself that if he doesn't meet it, it's considered a grand failure. Good
Right.
for him.
Right.
How lucky
Right.
is he that he set the bar so high for himself with a massively successful career that even, a small failure is huge.
Right.
You look at
Every
other
show needs to be
comedians.
every show needs to be
Yeah.
a grand slam home run, or you're like, what is this?
That's why most people don't make it to that level, because it's exhausting.
Right. Right. It's like Fish shows, right? The band Fish. Every show can't be the best show that you've ever seen. Some shows are just normal Fish shows, which is still a great day. So,
Correct.
right? Even
Well,
a mediocre Dave Chappelle monologue is still funnier
right.
than most comedians.
Absolutely.
So,
So yeah, I mean, look, you and I do a lot of work in battling anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish bigotry, anti-Jewish racism, anti-Jewish hatred, and it's also very important for us when we talk about what is the hatred of Jews and what is anti-Semitism and what is not. And one of the most important battles against anti-Semitism is truly recognizing it, really recognizing it. Because if we call everything anti-Semitic, then the real anti-Semitism, the dangerous kind, gets lost in the noise.
right.
Now, that also has been manipulated by anti-Semites who then say, oh, the Jews call everything anti-Semitism. So they've perfected the craft of hiding what is really anti-Semitic and what is not. And that's the challenge that we face as a Jewish people, is that the onus is upon us to let people know what is hatred of us and what is not. We
Right.
don't have as many people coming to our aid to protect and defend us the way other marginalized minorities have and have had. So that means that Jews, we need to do a better job and also toughen up.
So I think that what you're talking about here, in my view, is a two-part problem, right? The first part is sometimes things aren't anti-Semitic, and we're so sensitive to the anti-Semitism that we call it, and then people are like, well, not everything is anti-Semitism. And then there's the deeper part where people say, well, oh, I'm not allowed to criticize Israel, or I'm not allowed to criticize Jews, I'm not allowed to criticize the IDF without it being called. And then you're like, now I have to be defensive, or they're trying to get me to be defensive about something that is actually anti-Semitic. And I think that Natan Sharansky, and Yuval, you know who Natan Sharansky is, but for anybody who doesn't know who Natan Sharansky is, he is a Knesset member, a former Knesset member, a freedom fighter. He's a man who spent time in jail in the USSR for being Jewish and for speaking out about being Jewish, and he moved to Israel, and he is the great Zionist success story, really. Natan Transky said that there's the litmus test is the 3 Ds, and that is delegitimization, demonization, and double standards, right? So if your comments are double standards, let's take Miss Rachel, for example, right? If your comments are these double standards of when Israel does it is wrong, or I'm here for all children, except you're not speaking about all children, you're speaking about Palestinian kids or Gazan kids. You're not talking about Israeli kids. You're not talking about Sudanese kids. You're not talking about, any of the other children in the world. You're only talking about when Israel does something that you don't like. That's double standards. The demonization is the idea that, Israel is Nazism, the idea that Israel is any one of those things because we're involved in a war that we didn't start, or the delegitimization of Israel because of, right? So the idea like, oh, no ethno-state should be allowed to exist, and this is wrong. That's delegitimization.
Well, that's the
delegitimization.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Look,
and so it's not just a double standard. In fact, Jews, which includes Israel, face not a double standard, in my opinion, but a singular standard where we are treated differently than everybody else. Other countries are allowed to protect themselves against terrorism and against warring armies or other warring nations. Other countries are allowed to increase security to make sure that its population is safe. Other countries are allowed to be ethno-states or allowed to have a primary religion, but Israel is not. Israel is criticized every time it does it. Israel was already criticized on the night of October 7th, 2023, before Israeli troops even entered Gaza. There were protests against genocide that started to happen on October 8th of 2023 before Israeli troops entered Gaza. So it just shows that there was this strategy that was planned long before Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Gazans attacked Israel. This was something that was strategically planned for a long time, and Israel has been criticized for it. Also, people I know personally who were victims of the massacre and those who survived were also criticized for their victimhood if they suffered sexual assault and sexual violence or were hostages, were treated with such disrespect in Western media when they would speak out in Western areas, and it's just absolutely horrifying. So we're in this very difficult time. We should allow for criticism of Israel. Absolutely. The same way we allow for criticism of the United States or of France or Germany or South Africa or Japan, whatever. I can go through a list of countries across the world. That's part of what is incredible about having a democracy, even with different types of democracies, that you're able to criticize policies, you're able to criticize the actions of specific political leaders, but it doesn't mean you criticize the existence of the entire nation. When people criticize the existence of the entire nation of Israel, that is anti-Semitism. If you're criticizing why is Benjamin Netanyahu still the prime minister, or why is so-and-so political leader elected again, or why is a military operation doing XYZ instead of something else, well, sure, criticize those things. But criticizing the existence of the Jewish state in our ancestral homeland, a state that the entire Jewish religion, culture, and peoplehood is about the land. It's in our prayers every Shabbat. It's in the daily prayers for those who do daily prayers. It's part of every Jewish holiday. It's part of Jewish history. We're an indigenous people who have been conquered and occupied for thousands of years, and we're always tied to the land, trying to teach the next generations what it means to be part of the nation of Israel. That's how we call ourselves. We don't call ourselves the religion of Israel or the religion of the Jewish people. According to Judaism, we are Am Israel, which means nation of Israel. So we understand what it means to be a nationality. That's what we're fighting for. Now, in this argument of what is comedy, what is homophobia, as we mentioned, or what is anti-Semitism, yes, Not every disagreement with a Jewish person or with Israel is anti-Semitism. Not every critique of Israeli policy is anti-Semitism. But when, as you pointed out, when criticism becomes delegitimization, when it turns into demonization, when it singles out Jews or the Jewish state in ways that no other people or nation are treated, that is anti-Semitism. The double standard, as you mentioned, or the singular standard, as I refer to it, tells you everything. When the language moves from policy to identity, from critique to conspiracy, from debate to dehumanization, that's when it crosses the line.
In case anybody's wondering why I'm such a big fan of yours, Yuval, it's because you have a crystal clear ability to just cut through and speak clearly and say things perfectly. And what you said in the last 90 seconds is a perfect example of that. So forgive me while I fanboy for a moment and just, this podcast doesn't have like the canned laughs or the applause or anything, but if it did, it would be right here. Kol hakavod. That was perfectly said. Thank you for that.
I mean, but I took the words that you said and that I shared and focused on bringing it, into a more concise, biting statement.
Yep.
Maybe that comes from media training, from, my entire career has been in entertainment and media, understanding what the message is, understanding what the story is, understanding who the audience is. These are all things that you understand perfectly, beautifully, and creatively well yourself. My wish is that more Jews and allies knew how to do that. To say, you know what? Wait a second. Let me tell you this, bing, 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 and go through the whole, point by point and having that statement. The problem is we have so many people who are afraid to speak like that, and or feel like they're incapable or not confident to speak like that. And if you are not confident to speak like that, you're not confident to take the actions that partner with those words. It's not all about saying it. It's about actually doing the activism, the real boots on the ground work that we need.
Right.
And that's why so many initiatives that truly will save this world and save society are failing. There are initiatives for the Jewish people that are failing because more Jewish people weren't raised with a Jewish education to be able to understand what it means to be a Jew. There are so many initiatives within trying to ensure that we stay as a democracy. I mean, the amount of people in the United States who are marching for socialism and Marxism is absolutely insane. I feel like telling each of them, please sit down with somebody who fled from Cuba. Please sit down and speak to somebody from Venezuela. Please sit down and speak to somebody who fled the former USSR. Please sit down and speak to somebody in Iran who saw that the Iranian Revolution was a merger when the Islamist factions understood that they could manipulate the student groups and manipulate the socialists to feel like they're fighting against the same thing until they won, and then they killed off the socialists, killed the student groups, or subjugated them into horrific lifestyles. So all of these people need to understand what is reality. Anyway, I digress. It's all about being able to make a point and stick to it and really understand what we're fighting for here.
Yeah, something that you just said that I would like to expand on for a moment. You talked about the insanity that ensued on October 8th online and the coordinated media. I don't know how to say it as well as you did, but that is what happened. That was my experience that changed how I saw the world. Prior to October 7th, I didn't talk about Israel. I didn't talk about Jewish life on social media. I'm a commercial real estate broker. I do special needs advocacy. I talk about music and recovery, and that was sort of those were my pillars, my MO online. My focus of advocacy. I was lucky enough to give a TED talk about how we used music to enhance my daughter's nonverbal communication, really create a language for her. And on October 8th, I saw my friends, people who I spent time with and had real relationships with, change their profile pictures to paragliders with Palestinian flags. And I was appalled, and I was responding to them. And then people were saying to me, well, don't worry, you're one of the good ones. Yeah. Like, we don't hate you. We just hate them. And I was like, no, 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 no. I'm not one of the good ones. By your standards, I am not one of the good ones. And I started posting these videos, answering the questions of my friends who were saying to me, you're a decent guy, but Zionists are bad, and you're saying you're a Zionist. Can you explain to me how that works? And every time I posted a video, that would lead to 5 more questions, which I would make a video about, which would lead to 5 more questions. And, you know, I'm not a news site. I'm not breaking news on my social media. I'm answering the questions of my friends who wouldn't have another place to necessarily find this information, and really showing them that Zionists aren't these, you know, bloodthirsty warmongers that they're made out to be in the media, which is what I've been accused of. People have used those words to me specifically. And I'm really grateful that there are people out there who have heard that message and said, I'm really grateful that you, Benji, said that, because I wouldn't have known that otherwise. And so I feel compelled to share these things, because the world needs to know that, you know, what the Hamas PR machine and the Iran and Qatar PR machine are out there telling you about Jews and Israel and Zionists. It's just not that. So,
Well, you mentioned that your friends would go to you because they don't have a place to get that information otherwise. And to that, I disagree with you. They absolutely do have a place where they could get that information from vetted real sources, but the place that they choose to get their information were from people who share conspiracy theories, who share false information and propaganda against the Jewish people. If you really want to learn who somebody is, listen to them. If you really want to know what someone or a community is about, go to what the community says about themselves. The problem is, and again, I'm disagreeing with how you justified the need for you to be all of a sudden a representative of the Jewish people, a representative of the Israeli government and the IDF and Jewish history. That is the singular standard, not the double standard that is forced upon almost every Jew. We're expected to defend ourselves and to be able to answer all the questions. Nobody else is expected to know the entire history of the Jewish people and say what happened in 1948 and in 1953 and in 1967 and in 1973 and how many times the Islamist groups and the Palestinian leaders came to the negotiation table and turned down every Israeli prime minister time and time again for a two-state solution. We're expected to be able to say all of those things. So what you faced is exactly what I faced. It was exactly what so many Jewish people who had whatever sort of platform that we developed, we all of a sudden were expected to be ambassadors of the Jewish people and ambassadors of Israel. So that is one of the problems. Now, the PR machine of the Muslim Brotherhood that's been going on for decades has been much smarter and stronger, where they recognized that they needed to infiltrate the civil rights, social justice, and human rights movements, the student movements, in order to manipulate them to believe in an Islamist agenda. The Islamist agenda has 2 approaches. The main one is through violence and fear to get people basically to kill the infidel. If they're not going to convert to Islam, they will suffer from violence and terror. And it's written in the Quran. It's written in all of their documents of how they can take over the world and create a global caliphate that follows Sharia law. The other approach is understanding that many people, especially in the West, don't respond positively to violence. So they use the manipulation of language. They use the manipulation of thought. That's where the term Islamophobia was developed by people who came out of the Islamic Republic of Iran, seeing how homophobia was used and the strength of the word homophobia. They said, well, we need Islamophobia. I get accused of being Islamophobic a lot. I am not Islamophobic. I don't have an irrational fear of Islam. I do have a fear of Islamists. I do have a fear of violent jihadis. And it's not irrational. It's not a phobia. So we need to be able to understand how to speak about these things. And the answer is yes. Jews need to be much more educated and informed about our Jewishness as a people and as an individual. Our
Yeah.
allies need to be able to understand more and be more educated about the same things about us, because that just is beautiful and wonderful and lets us not just defend ourselves against hatred, but live in a beautiful way. And on the other hand, we need to make sure that people stop listening to terrorists and to terror supporters and terror apologists to understand why they should hate the people that the terrorists hate. So we're seeing
Right.
people siding with absolutely the wrong side. And as we have learned throughout the course of Jewish history, what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews, and the Islamists who hate the Jews, by the way, they also hate the fact that women have rights that they have in the West. They also hate LGBT people for being LGBT. They also hate Christians, and they hate Buddhists, and they hate non-practicing Muslims, and they hate all of these people. And you just have to listen to the words that the Islamists are sharing and then understand what their agenda is.
Right. And follow their actions, their words and their actions.
Follow their actions. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up. I got one thing left for you. This podcast, this Storied, this whole series was started because my father, my late father, who passed away a couple of years ago, was a rabbi, and his mantra, his war cry was, the biggest problem for Jewish continuity is the idea of Holocaust education being the central role in Jewish education, right? That can't be our central identity. Number two was the Yiddish expression, schwer zu sein a Yid, it's hard to be a Jew. And his thesis was, if the message that we give our children is it's hard to be Jewish, and by the way, they're coming for us, why would they want to stick around? Why would anybody want to participate? October 7th, in my eyes, combined those two problems and then amplified them. Storied is not the answer. Storied is an answer, right? We're talking about the Jewish contribution and collaboration. Other than this episode, the whole 14, the 13 of the 14 podcast episodes are really about the joy, the Jewish joy, the collaboration, the contribution of the Jewish community, and really just talking about positive aspects. This was a hard episode, but that's part of the story, and that's okay. So, two-part question, and then we're going to go. Number one, when you hear the words collaboration and contribution in today's world, what does that sound like to you? Where's the great Jewish contribution and collaboration that you see? And the second question is, when you hear the words Jewish joy, what does that mean to you?
Collaboration and contribution are essential for any people, or they're essential for peoplehood to believe in the future. I oftentimes say that seeing what's happening around the world, and especially seeing what's happening to the Jewish people internationally, I'm short-term pessimistic, but I'm long-term optimistic. I think harder things are going to happen. You can taste it in the air that there's going to be some really horrendous things that will happen in the short term, but I'm optimistic. I don't fight back, I fight forward. That is something, obviously, I've said 1,000 times in so many of my speeches about fighting forward, because that was ingrained in me from the place of Jewish thought and from Zionism, understanding that we need to do something for a better tomorrow. That's where the optimism comes. Now, it's tragic that it often takes anti-Semitism and attacks against Jews to wake up Jews to their Jewishness. Why does it take October 7th and Jewish families being murdered in front of each other, and swastikas on walls, and threats on schools, and mobs in the streets, and demolishing of Jewish businesses, or locking Jewish students in a college library, or violence against our people, to remind us who we are? Jewish identity shouldn't just be reactive, and it's not reactive. Jewish identity, in fact, is proactive. It's not just about survival. If the only time we embrace our Jewishness is when the world attacks us, then we're letting our enemies define us. We cannot let anybody else define us. We need to define ourselves. Our Jewishness, and Zichrono Livracha, your father, what you quoted was beautiful, and it resonates with everything I believe and what my father taught me, Zichrono Livracha, as well. Our Jewishness is not a burden. It's a gift. It's thousands of years of wisdom, of resilience, of creativity, of joy and life. It's Shabbat tables and it's songs and language and tradition and peoplehood. It's Yiddish humor and Israeli chutzpah, and it's Israel. It's everything we've contributed to humanity, even when humanity has tried to erase us. So we can't just keep waiting for the next attack to hold our heads high. The most powerful response to anti-Jewish hatred is not to fight against it. It's to live fully, proudly, joyfully as Jews. Haters might remind us that we're Jews, but we should already know that. And we should live like it, not in fear, but in pride.
I love that. I love that. You're a badass. All right, Jewish joy. What is Jewish joy? What is the Jewish joy in your life?
Joy. Jewish joy is celebrating our identity and understanding our uniqueness as a people, as a community, as a family, and as individuals. To have that Jewish perspective is great. The joy of not just accepting things as they are, but the joy of being able to challenge it. Look, I'm an avid adventure sports enthusiast. Skiing defines my life. Winter is my favorite season because I ski as much as possible. I ski because I'm facing challenges the entire time, and the challenges make it more exciting. If I didn't want a challenge, I would be on a green bunny slope and be the most bored person ever. I'm not that person. I like the double black diamonds, the expert only runs where I can have the most joy and the most exciting and pursue my passions in the most full way and not always know what to expect, what is going to be ahead, but knowing that I have the wherewithal and the ability to tackle whatever is ahead. That is what brings joy. I come from a family that of survivors, from my grandparents who survived heroically as Holocaust survivors, to my family who's been in Israel for generations, for many, many generations, who had to fight Arab invaders and British occupiers and so many different things. One thing that my grandmother, Zichronah Livracha, said, she said, behind every cloud, every dark cloud, the sun is still shining. And she would say, we have two options in life. When life is hard, we can cry and cry or laugh and cry. The choice is ours. To laugh and cry is much easier. To find the joy, that makes life much more beautiful. And that's what Jewish joy is all about. It's why so many Jews are funny, because we know the tragedies, we know the hardships. Almost every Jewish family has faced horrendous hardships or, in massive global scales. And we still need to find the place to celebrate who we are and to laugh and to enjoy every moment for what it is.
I love it. I love it. That's the perfect way to close this. Yuval, I can't tell you much. I appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom and making this clarity.
Benji, you do the same thing. You're telling me you appreciate me for things that you do. So I appreciate you, and I thank you for doing what you do and just empowering others to do the same in their own unique way.
Love it. All right. I will see you soon, my friend.
Toda raba.
Toda. That's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps the algorithm show other people this podcast. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, again, reach out. We would love to talk to you. And make sure you check out the show notes for the links to our socials and our sponsors. This show was produced by Ryan Storm from This Is Storm Sound. Editing done by Andrea Rizzuto. Production management done by Eric Nelson. Booking by Leanne Deutsch of 16 Mile Talent. Design work done by Tessa Hewitt. Research done by Avishai Bauman. Now, the music you heard is recorded by Evan Sherman, but was actually written by my late father, Rabbi Yuval Rosenzweig, as the original opening of the song that he wrote for the Diaspora Yeshiva band called Pitchuli. I'm your host and storyteller, Benji Rosenzweig, and this has been another episode of Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music, Season 1, The Beatles.